For 2 hours on Tuesday night, Germany's national rail operator had to stop all its trains across the country. A big, big deal in Germany, or for that matter, any country, I'd imagine. The cause, a failure in a communications network used by rail staff. Now, apparently, this was caused by workers swapping out a component. But I want to know how this ties into Deutsche Bahn's larger problems to do with punctuality, infrastructure and personnel. But first, this is what train stations look like across Germany. These are visuals from Munich in the south of the country. Trains were held in stations and some others stranded midway were being brought into stations, according to Deutsche Bahn. There were signs, all in German, announcing a nationwide stoppage in services. Passengers, meanwhile, waited on information about possible connections and alternatives. Here is a bit of what some of them had to say.
We came here, and as soon as we came, we saw a bunch of unhappy faces, and no one was speaking English. And on the sign, it said something completely in Deutsch. And we're like,
yeah, they just said.
We booked a bus for 8 a.m. just in case. But generally, we don't know what's going on. Some sort of communication error. That's what I think happened. He just said, everyone get off the train. And we got off the train. We don't even know why he kicked us off the train, but okay.
They are just saying like, oh, please, you have to wait. But we are still here waiting. So I think it's gonna come 12:57. So we are still out here waiting, but it's not fair, you know. People have reached home because I'm going to Frankfurt, so it's like 4 hours journey. But I'm here like 4 hours sitting here waiting. It doesn't make any sense for me.
And he's not the only one. Anyone who's taken a train in Germany can probably attest to some of those sentiments. But eventually the problem was solved. But this is what Deutsche Bahn CEO Evelyn Paller said to the Bild newspaper. And I quote, "After a 90-minute disruption, all trains are now running again. We were able to stabilize the situation using an emergency system. We now need to determine the cause," unquote. Matthew Moore is DW's political correspondent and has been following developments. Matt, so what exactly was this communication system that went down, and how did it exactly affect services?
The communication system, this digital radio system, Biresh, that went down is vital for communications between train drivers and control centres around the country. And this is basically a platform that allows them to share information about speed, about the conditions on the track. And without it, really, drivers are driving blind through the railway system. And that's why when that system failed, it really meant that the trains had to be brought to a halt and it paralysed the entire network. And as we saw that this led to confusion, to chaos and a lot of disruption in train stations across the country, Biresh. Not just that, we also saw that it impacted regional services here in Berlin. The S-Bahn, this is the local train service, was also affected. The similar situation in Munich. And really this was a nationwide breakdown that we did hear was resolved within a couple of hours, but I think it has delivered a certain shock to people that the system can be brought to a halt, and the system is so vulnerable. And as we heard there, the chief executive of the railway system, Evelyn Paller, says that they really want to get to the bottom of why this failure occurred.
We'll be talking about this on Wednesday morning, but just so we know, are services back to normal now across the board?
That's what Deutsche Bahn are saying. I took a trip to the main station here in Berlin to kind of get a sense of the picture, and it did seem to be that normality was resumed. Services were moving as expected. I mean, I did speak to one Deutsche Bahn employee there who said, look, delays are always expected with Deutsche Bahn, which I thought was some dark humour. But there will be a knock-on effect, and some travellers there are saying, you know, this just telling me that basically they weren't sure whether they're going to get home. There's a Dutch woman who said, you know, but really this just shattered my confidence in Deutsche Bahn, because I want to travel on the train. I don't want to fly through Europe. But increasingly, I cannot rely on what was once a really great service to get me from A to B punctually and without major delays. And so I think that's a big concern for the company, and it's clearly having an impact not just in Germany but outside Germany's borders.
And that's such an important point there, Matt. Like, many people don't consider it in this fashion. Lots of people would like to take the train for environmental reasons, but if the train is not available and you don't know when it'll eventually get you to your destination, it does become a problem. But I mean, as you said earlier, it's a shock to the system. It has shaken the country a bit as to this whole rail network being offline for 2 hours nearly. What have been the political reactions to this? I mean, surely there must be some by now, right?
Biresh, just remember, this happened late in the evening. We're in a very hot spell here in Germany. People would have been on warm trains, staff would have gone home for the evening, and that, I think, probably exacerbated the problem. So, of course, this morning, a lot of reaction, the Transport Minister demanding a full investigation. The state-level Transport Minister in North Rhine-Westphalia, the biggest, the most populous state in Germany, in West Germany there, he basically said there needs to be an emergency mechanism to make sure that this doesn't happen again. Some reaction from the Bundestag, from the Social Democrats there saying, and I'm going to quote this because it says, "Smooth and resilient rail service is essential for millions of people, businesses and military security." Remember, freight was affected as well. Rail service is a matter of national security. If a technical malfunction can disrupt rail service across large parts of Germany, then swift and comprehensive action must be taken. So it's going to be interesting because the chief executive of Deutsche Bahn is facing MPs, lawmakers in the Bundestag today. It was a pre-arranged meeting, but of course, after this disruption, a lot of questions and a lot of demands for accountability as to how something like this can be avoided in the future.
Now, when we talk about Deutsche Bahn, Matt, you and I live and work in Germany. I dare say we have a lot more experience with Deutsche Bahn on a daily basis compared to some of the tourists, for example, who visit Germany and then encounter this kind of a shock. But then the question really remains, I mean, Deutsche Bahn, a company, a network that once prided itself on punctuality and showing up on time, it has a very different story to tell now. And just for the sake of our viewers, how did it come to this? I mean, how did we start talking about Deutsche Bahn's punctuality, infrastructure problems, personnel problems? How did it all wind up into this kind of a mess, dare I say, use this word, in this situation?
Biresh, how long have you got? Because it goes back decades, really, frankly. I mean, there's underinvestment over decades. This is a railway network that large parts of it are 100 years old. So there's a need to modernise, to renovate the railways. There's repair works that are constantly needing to be done. That exacerbates the delays. That sometimes leads to speed restrictions. Again, all kind of creating these delays. But at the moment, I mean, the big picture is 60% of long distance rail is punctual. So 40% of the trains, long distance trains in Germany in 2025 arrived late. That's a disaster. But as you say, there's also the personnel problems. It's hard to get staffing. And this has really been a trend that's been developing since 2020, in the last 5 years. And essentially, you've got that coming up against the need to spend a lot of money on infrastructure, on modernising the railway, increasing demand, as you say. A lot of people are now saying that flying is too costly, or they don't want to do it because of environmental reasons. That's pushing more of a burden on the railway network here in Germany. And then I guess the kind of the final thing, which is not the main reason, but again it just adds to this, is this issue of sabotage. In the last few years, there's been more and more sabotage attempts on the German railway system. Last year, the German Federal Police said there was 100 incidents that they would attribute to sabotage of some description, whether that's left-wing extremist groups or foreign state actors. And that can be things like cutting cables, as we saw in West Germany last summer. That meant that the railway network there, the stretch of rail there, was delayed for days. all of that just adds up. And so you've got this situation where you've got a new chief executive who's come in, and her job will really be to reset Deutsche Bahn and try to get it back on track. But it's going to take many years.
I mean, it must be said she only took over in October last year as CEO, so a very, very big job. I think she described it as a marathon and not so much of a sprint. Matt, we'll leave it there. Thanks so much for joining us today. All right, then, let's pick up on some of those points that Matthew was making with Nick Kingsley. He's executive editor at the Railway Gazette International. It's an online portal that reports on the global rail industry. Nick, welcome. Thanks for making the time. Now, you've heard about this system that developed a problem, this so-called Global System for Mobile Communications Railways, or GSMR for short. What do you know about this system? I mean, how vulnerable is it to breakdowns or cyber attacks or some other sort of malfunction?
Yeah, thank you. Good morning. It's quite vulnerable because it's quite an old system. So as the name GSM suggests, this is actually a form of 2G era mobile telecoms connectivity developed in the 1990s. So railways across Europe installed this system to improve their wayside to train communication in the 90s. But because of the complexity of upgrading digital systems in the rail sector and the safety criticality of the rail sector, it's proving quite difficult to move to the next generation of telecoms, which means the railways are still heavily reliant on technology that the telecoms industry has moved on from, if that makes sense. And I would say it's vulnerable because the telecom sector is less and less willing to support the components and the spare parts. Clearly, there have been reports of vulnerability to cyber attack as well, but that's much harder for us to verify because, for obvious reasons, it's not something any of the parties involved in the sector particularly want to discuss publicly.
I'm honestly gobsmacked listening to what you just said. So just to sum up what you said, we're talking about a 2G-based system which is vulnerable to breakdowns or potential hacks. But this is critical to the safe operation of railways, not just in Germany. Am I understanding this right? It's across the board in Europe, in other railways as well. But this still continues to be used. There really is no other system that can replace this, that makes it slightly more reliable?
It is still being supported and maintained by the supply chain. So while I would say I wouldn't say that trains are unsafe as a result of using GSMR. I do not want to give that impression.
Okay.
However, there is a high-level program across the rail sector internationally, but certainly Europe-wide, to develop something called the Future Railway Mobile Communications System, which will see railway communications move to a 5G and a satellite-supported technology platform. But clearly, this forms part of a much, much wider digitalization agenda within the rail sector. And as railways are a highly safety-critical industry, it is not easy. It's not like the consumer space. It's not like you can go to a store and just trade in your cell phone or your mobile phone and just pick up a new one that's 5G. For railways, it means refitting, for example, every cab of every locomotive in Europe will need to have a new onboard unit put on it. The FRMCS program is worth hundreds of billions of euros, and even within the rail sector is not actually being talked about as much as it should be, because it is an urgent, critical change that we need to make across the sector. And the progress is happening, but it is happening still quite slowly.
And maybe because it's not being talked about so much, it's the first time I'm hearing it from you. Just as an estimate, how long do you think it would take for this to be implemented, at least in Germany?
Well, there is a test site for the technology in the southeast of Germany, in the Erzgebirge Mountains. So the systems are being trialled by Deutsche Bahn and by its partners in the telecoms industry at the moment. But it will probably take another 10 years for this to become standard equipment that's fitted to almost every train in Germany. But it will bring some huge advantages because it will also, GSMR is a bespoke railway telecoms technology, whereas the aim for FRMCS is that railways will be able to use, with appropriate cybersecurity and technological safeguards, they will be able to use public mobile network infrastructure to support data transfer between the trackside and the train. But of course, it's critical because the railways are digitalizing, and you cannot have, for example, digital signaling or better onboard Wi-Fi. You can't have those functions if you don't have a data transfer backbone that will facilitate those operations. And it's progress is slower than I think everybody would like.
10-year long wait, at least in Germany. So what happens in the interim? So we're talking about this 2G-based system that is going to continue for at least another 10 years, if your estimations are correct. What is the backup option if this system fails, as it did on Tuesday evening in Germany? I mean, what is the alternative to replacing that when this system fails?
Well, I think there will in each country and in Europe, and certainly even possibly within a large railway market like Germany, there will be specific operating rules that you fall back on for sort of degraded operation. So I think generally speaking, in our experience, GSMR failures are corrected quite quickly. The system can be repaired and back up and running. The real impact, of course, is that the disruption to the rail traffic lasts longer, particularly because the rail network in Germany, as we all know, is under so much pressure. It's carrying quite a lot more traffic than it probably should do, given the state of the infrastructure, particularly in the sort of dense urban areas. So I think it's really not a case of fallback options for GSMR. It's more a case of how do we manage the disruption caused by a GSMR outage, and how do we get trains moving again quickly as possible.
Can I get you to assess Germany's response to the breakdowns on Tuesday evening? How would you assess the emergency response to that? And the reason I ask is because purely from a consumer-focused point of view as well, there were people who were complaining that they were stuck in trains for an hour and a half, for example, because the train could not move and they were not next to any train station. How would you assess the gamut of the German response to the breakdown on Tuesday evening?
Well, I can't comment on every individual incident. What we have seen is a particularly vociferous criticism from particularly the rail freight sector, which is often overlooked. It's not the most glamorous or politically weighty element of the rail business, but a lot of the rail freight trade associations are saying that one of the problems with an outage happening at night is it disproportionately affects freight trains, which of course has a knock-on effect on the German economy and German industry. I think in terms of managing passenger trains, clearly it's hugely disruptive if passengers are stuck on trains, but safety has to be the top priority. If the train does not have a safe communication portal to and from the trackside and to and from the control centres, the trains cannot move. I think the risks are exacerbated by the hot weather we're having at the moment. But we're seeing right across Europe at the moment, we've seen, for example, in France, some really critical headlines about trains being stranded in the heat wave. Generally speaking, when passengers are stuck on trains for more than an hour, there will be a lot of criticism, especially these days with social media. But I think we can't say that Deutsche Bahn is managing this better or worse than anybody else.
You know, we're talking about Deutsche Bahn. I live and work here in Germany. I take Deutsche Bahn trains on a daily basis, like millions of people across the country. And the topic of conversations on a normal day, without any breakdown in software communications like we saw on a Tuesday evening, is to do with Deutsche Bahn's punctuality problems, right? I mean, that's something that you at least see, not in the freight sector. I mean, I cannot speak about the freight sector, but at least as a consumer, you see this with your own eyes. The train doesn't arrive on time, or it doesn't get you to your location on time. And just bear with me. I'd like to illustrate this with a graphic. We are in Germany after all, so we have a graphic that we can show some of our viewers. This is a graphic from one of Germany's public service broadcasters, ARD1. And here, this basically just gives us an estimation of the punctuality of German trains. So just follow me on this. So the purple line over here looks at the period from October 2024 till November 2025. And you see when it comes to this purple line, when it comes to punctuality with long distance trains, it has dropped from 62.9% to about 54.5% in November 2025. This is about the punctuality about departing at the given time. The line above, the blue line over here, talks about punctuality in long-distance trains when it comes to arriving at their locations at the given time, and this has dropped from 70.1% punctuality to about 61.9% between October 2024 and November 2025, and just overall. The punctuality is down to about 84.5% from about 88.6%. I think the point we're trying to sort of make here, Nick, and for our viewers, is that punctuality is a huge problem here in Germany. We're talking about Deutsche Bahn trains, and we do need to talk about Deutsche Bahn trains because that is the national rail service provider. Why would you say is punctuality such a problem with Deutsche Bahn?
Again, I think we can see the structural issues that Deutsche Bahn is facing. They are not that different to the issues facing other rail operators, major rail providers across Europe. I think Germany, as one of the densest, the most heavily used rail networks in Europe, is acutely affected by some kind of institutional or structural issues that are affecting the rail sector overall. One of the biggest risks to rail punctuality in Europe is the changing climate, for example, because the extreme heat, for example, that we're seeing at the moment, it affects the condition of the track. You have a risk of track buckling in heat waves. You have major risks of overhead electrification equipment failing from the extreme weather. These are challenges that railways right across Europe are facing. Where Germany and Deutsche Bahn in particular has another issue is, I think, in the design of its rail network. So Germany has invested in new sections over the last 30, 40, 50 years, in new sections of high-speed line for the Intercity Express service, but the design of that network is structured in such a way that trains kind of weave on and off the sections of new high-speed line that have been built. In contrast, somewhere like Japan, for example, the decision with the Japanese bullet train, the Shinkansen, was to completely separate the infrastructure. So the Japanese high-speed trains almost never run into the same platforms. They never share tracks with commuter trains. The same in Spain. Now, partly this is because Spanish and Japanese trains, high-speed trains, don't share a common track gauge, whereas in Germany, all the trains share a common track gauge, which means they can interweave with each other. But I think what we're seeing as demand has gone up for passenger rail over recent years, helped by initiatives like the Deutschland ticket, we're seeing demand outstripping supply, and we're seeing more trains being added to the timetable, and we're seeing trains tripping over each other, particularly at key hubs, for example, around places like Frankfurt and Köln. So I think it's really this chronic lack of capacity and the fact that there aren't as many dedicated tracks for different types of service. I think that is a structural issue for the German network.
I mean, it just seems like a Gordian knot, then, doesn't it? I mean, you don't seem to have the infrastructure on the one hand to accommodate, say, high-speed lines, and they are sharing that in any case with existing lines on which, let's say, slower trains or regional trains operate. Yet the government, on environmental grounds, for example, and also amongst people, they want to take more trains. They don't want to take planes. It should be slightly cheaper as well, but the capacity is not there. So something's got to give. I mean, which is the point in this entire chain where there is scope for improvement that improves the overall picture?
Well, this is quite kind of, again, quite nerdy back office detail.
Let's do nerdy. Let's do a bit of nerdy stuff now, yeah.
There's quite a lot of work being done behind the scenes in the German rail system to try to rethink how capacity is allocated and managed across the German network. And the German government and Deutsche Bahn are developing what they hope will be an integrated national rail timetable, so that the slots that trains take are kind of designed at a system level. I think to some extent the current operational plan for rail services in Germany is developed ad hoc over time, responding to kind of short-term needs or particular kind of regional priorities across the country. And the German government, I think, is keen through its TAKTFAHR plan program to develop something that's much more robust and resilient as a means to run the national rail network. This is the model that the Swiss have developed over the past 20 or 30 years. So it's very much a Swiss philosophy. But it does in itself bring some downsides because, of course, Germany has very strong Bundesländer and very strong regional transport authorities, and they may not appreciate perhaps a central timetable structure being imposed on their local rail networks. And I think the tension between national government priority and local government for rail services, I think that could be an obstacle to this kind of national operating plan.
So in addition to all the infrastructure problems, all the personnel problems, there's also the political problems, as one potentially might expect. Deutsche Bahn has a new CEO, Evelyn Pahl, who also worked with the Deutsche Bahn earlier. She's also worked with the Austrian railways earlier in her career. She took over late last year, and she had, Evelyn Pahl, I mistakenly called her Pahl, Ms. Pahl, she took over late last year, and she had said that, let's say, renovating Deutsche Bahn is a marathon and not a sprint. Can you help us understand how she's prioritizing the work with Deutsche Bahn, what her priorities are, and how she's going about improving services?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the first thing to say, I think it's to her credit and to Deutsche Bahn's credit that they've got somebody to lead the company who has worked elsewhere in Europe in the rail sector. I think the railways across Europe are still quite domestic in that outlook. I don't think we see enough executives moving from major railway companies in different countries and experiencing a different sort of political environment and a different, perhaps, funding environment. So I think it's good that she's spent time with the ÖBB in Austria. Another big plank of the DB upgrading strategy is also these kind of long-term engineering blockades. So they're kind of taking key corridors. We've just seen the Berlin to Hamburg main line reopen after several months of engineering closures. They're trying to do these big bang upgrades of the key corridors, which is a really ambitious strategy. But I think it's probably the only way for Evelyn Pahl and her team to actually deliver some upgrades in a manageable time frame. So there'll be several of the key main lines being closed at various points over the next few years to try and get more work done than would be possible, for example, if you only did engineering work at weekends or overnight. So that is a major part of her strategy to try to upgrade the network. But it comes with limitations because, of course, you have to divert or reroute the trains while these blockades are ongoing.
I take the train on a regular basis, Nick, and sometimes I just get this feeling, and it's a very personal feeling, others may not share it. It's like I'm spending a lot of my time, a lot of my life just waiting on platforms for trains to show up on time and get me to my destination in time. For a poor consumer like me, how long would you say, just give me a ballpark figure, before we can see, with the strategy that you described here, before we can see some sort of relief on a daily basis to start making itself visible on the German train network?
Well, unfortunately, I don't have a crystal ball. I mean, this will be the work of many years. I'm sure there will be some short-term steps that can be taken to improve matters. But the reality is, as we know from what happened during the European Football Championships in 2024, for example, it's been problematic for a few years now. There's been this reliability and capacity crisis. So yeah, hopefully, I can't give you a guaranteed prediction. All I would say, if it's any consolation to German rail users, is that there was a survey undertaken last year by a business travel company here, and they surveyed rail users in the business community, and one of the results of this survey was that they surveyed rail travellers in the UK, France, and Germany, and in each country, the respondents said, "Oh, the railways in the neighbouring country are better than ours." So every country thinks other people's railways are better, but I would just, if it's any consolation, I would just say the issues that Germany is facing, yes, they are severe, yes, they are acute, but you are not alone in managing this battle of rising passenger rail demand and increasing pressure on the infrastructure.
Good to know I'm not alone. Nick, thanks so much for talking to us. Nick Kingsley from Railway Gazette International. It's been educational. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
So, have you had any bad experiences with Deutsche Bahn? And how does that compare to railway operators in your country? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel as well. I'm Biresh Banerjee in Berlin. Take care. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.